Morning, everyone. Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics. Today, meeting number 103, pursuant to Standing Order 81-4, Main Estimates 2018-2019. Vote 1 under the Office of the Commissioner of Lobbying. Vote 1 under the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner. Vote 1 under the Office of Senate Ethics Officer. Vote 1 and 5 under Offices of the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Canada. Referred to the committee on Monday, April 16th. We'd just like to welcome this morning the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner, Mr. Dion. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, honourable members of the committee, for inviting me to appear this morning as the committee considers the budgetary submission for 2018-2019. I am accompanied by Ms. Sandy Tremblay, our Director of Corporate Management and Chief Financial Officer. It's been almost 4 months, and only 4 months, since I started as Commissioner. When I arrived at the office in January, as I thought when I last appeared before you, I found a well-organized office, a fully staffed office, with effective structures and processes in place. I'm therefore in the envious situation of being able to focus on the matters that should require some improvements, as opposed to having to rebuild and reimagine what should have been there, as has been the case before once in my career. I've done that. My office, in fact, when I showed up the morning of January 9th, my office had already submitted the estimates for this fiscal year, 18-19. I quickly reviewed. I saw no reason to revise anything. It seemed perfectly appropriate, so I did approve the $6.9 million that was submitted for that purpose. And to provide some context for this figure, this number, 6.9 million, I'd like to discuss some of our office's priorities in terms of how we intend to fulfill our mandate in the coming year. The approach the office will take under my leadership is, I think, one of the first things I did was develop a mission statement for the office. So we did that, and in February we came up with the following mission statement, which I'll read to you. It's not long. Our office provides independent, rigorous, and consistent direction and advice. We do both, direction and advice, to members of Parliament and to federal public office holders. That's the first thing we do. We also conduct investigations. That's the second thing we do. And where necessary, the third thing we do is we make use of appropriate sanctions in order to ensure full compliance with the Conflict of Interest Act and the Conflict of Interest Code for members of the House of Commons. The office is an institution that serves an important purpose. Our role is to contribute to the enhancement of Canadians' trust and confidence in elected members of Parliament and appointed public office holders. The mission statement reflects our responsibility for administering two similar but distinct, quite different in fact, regimes, and the various means, some preventive, other reactives, by which we will do so. The mission statement will be hung in our meeting rooms. It serves to remind our staff that our day-to-day work is governed by the very rules we administer, and to help keep our focus on what matters most. And it also enables, I think it's important that external audiences also have a better sense of what we do. So that's why I spent some time developing the mission statement, and we'll spend some time broadcasting the mission statement. In addition to doing that, we've also refreshed our office's brand identity. So we've done some branding, because it's not only because it's fashionable, but I think it was important to have a distinguishable appearance in the products that we release. And I hope you'll like it. You'll see it when we table our annual report next month. Early next month, we will table our annual reports, I should say, one under the Act, one under the Code, and you will see new colors and new appearances. And I think our effort was to, and I think we have successfully communicated our independent and impartial character, the nature of the work we do, and the way we do it, i.e., or c'est-à-dire, with integrity, rigor, and consistency. That's also important, consistency. La deuxième chose qu'on a mis qui était pratiquement complétée.
The second thing that was almost complete when I came in was the strategic plan. The strategic plan was already very advanced. It had identified priorities over the next 3 years. Given that it fitted well with my vision, we made some small changes to it, and we approved it. You'll be able to read that in the annual report that we plan to table at the beginning of June. The plan identifies priorities in 3 key areas. Education and outreach is such an area. As I said in my previous appearance, I want to make sure that public office holders and members of the House of Commons have the information they need to understand a somewhat complex set of rules and to be in a position to actively meet their obligations and meet them at all times. Then, if they do contravene the Act or the Code, it will not be because of ignorance, not by omission. We will go beyond the traditional classroom approach and leverage new media technologies to reach out to them. We'll be using webinars and online videos, for example. People who are governed by the Act are very busy and don't necessarily have time to go to classrooms and sit there for 2 hours. In fact, they should be able to consult modules at all times, webinars, videos that explain one or other aspect of the Act or Code, things that are very stringent but very accessible at the same time. In the same vein, we have signed a protocol last March with the Commissioner of Lobbying so that our offices can work together in areas where our mandates overlap. We have a memorandum of agreement to develop a series of products in education and outreach to help our administrators and those who are administered by us find their way. In the coming months, we'll review all educational materials and revise them as needed. When public office holders and others seek advice, we aim to provide clear and consistent direction. I've already stated unequivocally that I will be applying the Act and the Code strictly. It will be strictly enforced by promptly investigating possible contraventions of both regimes and making use of appropriate sanctions. We will also be making greater use of the media to inform the public about our role and activities. We have replaced our financial management system and started upgrading our electronic case management system. We're also planning the redesign of our website with implementation to take place in the next fiscal year. So we've talked about modernization, education. The third area is operational excellence. We want to focus on leadership, integrity, stewardship, transparency, accountability. In the coming months, I have a great deal to do. I intend to review all of our policies and plans. They're on our website, and to update them as necessary to reflect best practices in public sector management. So, on the whole, that's what we're doing. With regard to budgetary requirements,
Increases in the demands on our resources. I expect our office will be able to implement its mission in 2018-19 with an annual operating budget of $6.9 million as we have sought. Salaries account for the majority of our expenditures, 81%. We're fully staffed. We typically experience a low employee turnover, which is a good thing. Because it's a very specialized line of work, so it takes time there's a long learning curve for people who join the office. So we have 49 positions in total, and 18 of those positions are directly used to provide advice to public office holders and MPs. The other positions are used in corporate services, communications and outreach, legal services, investigations, and in my own office. Major expenditures this year include the upgrade of our, as I've said, of our electronic case management system, because it has to be, we talk about consistency, we talk about accuracy, rigor, so it's important to be able to rely on the state-of-the-art when it comes to the system that we use. We will also modernize the public registry and redesign our website. And there will be costs also associated with the MOU, with the lobbying commissioner that I've mentioned. So I think we will make full use for the first time ever of our budget this year. Our surplus is, for the last year, our surplus is less than 2% of the budget. This year it will be lower because we basically have granted pay increases to our employees. So we will be able to live within our means, barring something really unforeseen. But it will be much tighter this year than it was last year. In fact, the office, you may not know this, but the budget, $6.9 million, is the same budget as when the office was first created in 10 years ago, 11 years ago, essentially the same level, 6.9. The budget was never fully spent. In fact, I brought a graph with me showing the distance between approval and usage. There's always a big gap. And I think the lines will cross this year of expenditure and budget. We've had significant increases in some areas. For instance, 22% increase last year in the number of situations where advice was sought. 22%, that's quite something. So we have 2,900 situations where people have sought advice, which is much more than the 2,400 the year before that. Public communications, probably in large part due to the Morneau situation and the Trudeau report, but nevertheless, it went up 30%. The contact with the public and contact with the media last fiscal year, 30% compared to the year before that. So in case you wonder, we had 2,700 situations where the public means people who are not subject to the act, who are not media representatives, 2,700 situations. And the media was in touch with us 411 times last year compared to 315 the year before that. So we've accommodated within existing budget. It's becoming tighter. We'll make better use of technology. I think it's quite predictable that if things remain current, that we will need an additional injection of resources in future fiscal years. But my team and I will do everything we can this year to live within our allocated budget. And although there are supplementary estimates that we know exist, and if there is a compelling reason to do so, we will be making a submission.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I was finished anyway. This concludes my remarks. So.
Thank you, Mr. Dion. First up, Mr. Bayless for 7 minutes.
Merci, Mr. Dion, d'être ici. Premièrement,
Mr. Dion, thank you for being here. I can see you've been very busy over the past 4 months. I'd like to begin with the changes that you've made. Is your mission statement new? Was there already something there, or did you create a new one? There was already something there which I reviewed. It wasn't very well known. It was a little vaguer than this one. So I thought it would be a good thing to rewrite the mission statement so that we could make it clear. Was it vague for employees, for you? Well, I considered it vague, so I believed other people would as well. And that's why I decided to dust it off and tighten it. So this is part of the framework you're providing, the goals of your department. Yes, we want alignment. We want people to know exactly what we're trying to accomplish from day to day. It's going to be there right in front of them every day. And it's going to be clear to others as well, people who are governed by the Act and Code. They'll know what we do, what we don't do, and they'll be able to hold us accountable. We are making a commitment to be stringent with ourselves. We're going to try to be consistent. Those are the commitments we make in a mission statement, both within and outside.
you did an overview of your department and you saw where there might be some needs, and you've identified 3 areas that you want to work on. Is that correct?
In fact, those are the only three areas that my office should be concerned with and has been concerned with in the past. It simply serves to clarify with as much precision as possible that we do three things in life, basically. We do preventative work. When I say our office provides direction and advice. So there's a distinction between advice and direction. We also sometimes get in touch with MPs and public office holders, even though they have not called us. So, for instance, when you got elected the first time, we did communicate with you to require you to make an initial statement. That's an example of providing direction. We also provide advice in the course of doing the first declaration, or when your office wants to know something precisely about a situation that is arising, we provide advice. That's the first thing we do. And that's what we burn the majority of our resources on. Preventative, that's right.
On preventative.
Sorry.
That aspect there, you touched on it, education.
Yeah.
And dissemination of that information, education, dissemination. When you talk about the education, you're talking not just educating the people that are subject to the act or the code, but also is your staff going to be upgraded too? Are you educating all around? Because things are changing rather rapidly, as we know. Est-ce que ça fait l'ensemble de l'éducation quand vous regardez?
Does that provide a full range of education, if you like?
The people who are governed by the Act and the Code, we start there. That's the most important thing. And it's not done completely at this point in time. We can do much more and much better. And we will not at this point in time do anything other than what we do, except maybe tweet a little bit more for the 545 people who follow us, the followers, which we hope to increase to 1,000 before this year is over. 1,000 is not much. It's still modest, but it's achievable. But we will focus on the people governed. I think that's where it counts the most. That's where the education matters the most, vis-a-vis the objective, which is to make sure that the Act and the Code are respected.
And so it would lead me to say part of respecting the Act is really to understand the Act.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, for example, in my personal experience, when I was first elected, I didn't know anything about the Act, and there was a lot of work. And I think I would have benefited from more education on just how to navigate it, what they're looking for. That. So I would definitely agree with you on that part. That the more we're educated, the more likely we are to be able to make sure we properly follow it.
The premise is that people who get elected to Parliament are usually law-abiding and wish to be, you know? And it's important to give them the tools to make sure that through omission they don't do something which they will come to regret, essentially.
In that light, that you're going to maybe adding more emphasis on, say, education, you have 49 full-time staff. Could you give me an idea of how they're assigned, what their different lumps of people are, groupings of people, if you will?
Yeah, easily. So we have 18 people who are providing direction and advice, and who are also involved in education. Okay, so it's not their main job, but they are the most knowledgeable people in the office, and they actually end up not setting up the logistics of trading, but the provision of substantive trading. Okay, so those 18 people. Then we have 8 people in legal services and investigations. Together, 3 lawyers and 5 non-lawyers in that group, and they work very closely together. They're supervised by the same person. And then we have 11 people in what we call corporate services, finance, human resources, IMIT, who essentially make sure that we have proper policies in place to manage people, to manage money, to manage information holdings, and so on and so forth. And we have 8 people in communications and outreach, who are the drivers of the education that we're talking about. They are in charge, they're responsible to see to it that the videos that I was talking about and the webinars are developed and delivered, even though they will draw on compliance and advisory to actually create the substance, because the knowledgeable people are in compliance and advisory. So that's the breakdown and my office has 4 people.
So 18 of the 49, approximately 40% are derived directly for casework, interfacing with the different actors, is that?
They do nothing but that. And they're not managers either. It's more than 18 if you include management. So
And then you add another 6 that are in communication, you say?
8. 8 people in
8
communication.
in communication. So together, more than 50% of your staff is driven towards
Yep.
looking outside to either provide advice, provide direction, provide communication.
That's right.
Thank you, Mr. Bayless. That's
Thank you.
Next up for 7 minutes, Mr. Kent.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for your attendance. You're a frequent visitor to this committee, and you're always welcome. It's interesting to see the venture into social media, and I'm sure that you're following some of the other responsibilities that this committee has with some of the dangers therein. Could you just, for the record and for our large television audience, advise us of your Twitter handle?
The Twitter handle. So I'll ask, I have some staff in the room. They will write down the Twitter handle and give it to me because it's not polite to take out my iPhone, I guess, right? Okay.
And of course, the next question is, will you be considering Facebook Live at some time in the near future?
I don't think so, because I think our office has to, it's a fine balance, using these tools, our office has to project an image of seriousness and professionalism, and I'm not sure Facebook does that all the time. So it's CIEC, it's at CIEC-CCIE, and it's federally regulated, so we have to be called that. We have no choice. It's not very user-friendly, however, but
and is it fair,
CIEC-CCIE.
and is it fair to assume most of the content in these tweets will be advisory rather than, or reminders rather than updating investigation?
Yeah, we don't, essentially, we cannot update investigations, but they will be, most of them will be advisory. One new practice I have instituted is to, we will tweet also when we impose a penalty. The minute it's put on the registry, the same day it will be tweeted, so that media representatives, for instance, who want to keep track, or political offices, will be able, they won't have to look at the registry every morning to see whether something has happened. And we will also, when we table a report, we will have several tweets on the findings in the report, as opposed to a single tweet attaching the report.
Okay.
We'll try to decipher the report for our Twitter followers.
Now, you mentioned the increased workload in the last year with regards to the Trudeau investigation, the Morneau investigation. We understand that one major investigation of Minister Morneau is continuing. Do you still expect to file your report by June?
Yes.
And can you tell us, without revealing, compromising any of the other investigations you may have underway, how many other investigations, major investigations, are underway by your office?
I will tell you that major is a very tricky thing. It's very subjective. So we have 7 investigations, including the one involving Minister Morneau. And we have 8 other matters that we are currently looking at in order to determine whether we should investigate. So a total of 15 cases under active consideration, including 7 investigations.
So these other matters that you're considering investigation haven't been provoked by requests by members for investigation, but they have come to your attention?
Some have been, are the result of a complaint made by some members of Parliament, and some others are at my own volition, essentially, under the Act and the Code.
Right. A lingering question that I have that involves unacceptable gifts. You made it clear, and the Prime Minister has indirectly made it clear, that unacceptable gifts do not have to be registered. That prompts any number of questions. Do you think that unacceptable gifts need to be reported and publicized? In other words, if an unacceptable gift is received but given back only because it's been identified as an unacceptable gift, do you not agree that perhaps there should be a consideration or a process to report the offering of an unacceptable gift, particularly by a registered lobbyist or representative of a lobby organization?
So we're, by answering this question, Mr. Chair, I'm wandering into the area of potential legislative review, because under the current Act, it is very clear that an unacceptable gift does not have to be declared. Mm-hmm. So if the committee, the government, was considering legislative review, I would say that the spirit of the act is that, first of all, you don't accept what is a gift that cannot be accepted. That if some people realize a few hours or a few days after they've accepted a gift that it should not have been accepted. If you return the gift, I think you should be forgiven. If you keep the gift for 5 years and then you suddenly decide to return it, maybe it should be sanctioned. So it's a question of facts. Each case is a question of facts, and some gifts cannot be returned by their very nature. They can be reimbursed but not returned. So this has to be carefully looked at. The intent of the current act is you don't accept gifts that should not be accepted, and when they can be taken to mean that they can influence you in your future decisions and actions. You simply don't accept them. That's the end of the story. And you only have to declare gifts that are acceptable, that are in excess of $200, 30 days after they've been received, and 60 days in the case of the code, applicable to MPs.
Now, you've made clear in your mission statement that you will provide independent, rigorous, and consistent direction and advice to members and government, I assume. Will you be making recommendation in the annual report with regards to strengthening of the Act and the Code and requesting greater meaningful penalties as you've discussed with us previously?
In the upcoming annual report, I will refrain from doing so because I think it's too soon after. I would like to have the benefit of a few more months of active practice before starting to make any pronouncement about what would be good and not good. All I have is the recommendations made by my predecessor. I've gone through them. I disagree with some of them, but I'd like some maturity in the process to set in before I do that. So my hope is that I'll be asked next fall to express a point of view, and if I'm not being asked, then I will have something in the annual report for 18-19 that will be tabled in June of 2020.
Would you expect to be asked by this committee or by the government?
I think the natural place for it to happen would be this committee based on my historical observations.
We'll put that in our date book. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kent. We're just getting some really bad feedback. I don't know if the sound is able to fix that. I don't know if we're still getting that. Just let me know. It's quite strong in our earpieces. But next up for 7 minutes, Mr. Angus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. We had a very long, involved, ongoing conversation with your predecessor at this committee about many wide-ranging issues, and I think this committee is where we are, I guess, the interface for parliamentarians on trying to bring forward recommendations on what is how we work well with the Act. I would say at the beginning, I think the education component, as my colleague had raised, I think is really important. I don't find very many parliamentarians are very aware of how the office works. Proactive calling the office to check in, which I think would save a lot of people a lot of grief in the long term, may not be top of mind. So I'd like to ask your ideas on how you could start a better relationship with MPs as well, I think, so that we can start to talk about how we work, and because ordinary MPs are not the designated public office holders, we're not the senior bureaucrats, we're the ones who are out going to 3 and 4 events a night, getting dinners and talking to people, and having clear rules means a clear conversation.
Yes. I appreciate your comments, Mr. Angus, and I fully agree, Mr. Chair, with what the member has said. So we will put a lot of attention on developing modern approaches to doing that. And I think it would also be important, Mr. Chair, that MPs be encouraged by their leaders and their whip to actually attend or make use of those tools, because it takes two to tango, as you know. We can develop all we want. It has to be well known, but the MPs have nevertheless have to go and click and have a look and listen carefully for a few minutes.
Well, thank you for that. In the previous Parliament, I was sometimes unpopular with my colleagues because I was always in caucus reminding them about it's not just the letter, it's the spirit. And So to that end, one of the discussions we had with Ms. Dawson many times is on how you influence a politician. She was very much interested in gifts, and we used to say, you know, when I get a purple blanket from the Insurance Company of Canada left, I don't even notice that it's in the room. That's not influencing me. But the potential for a lobbyist to hold a fundraiser for me could influence me. But the interpretation was always, well, that's not a direct benefit. But in the world of politics, if someone's holding a fundraiser for your riding association, to me, that's always been a direct benefit. But we never, the office never set out rules. Ms. Dawson always talked about dealing with it, but we never really got there. Are you looking at issues like how to determine fundraising events in a fair way that's that we can have clear rules?
It's clearly you'll see in our annual report, we will have a graph showing the interest that gifts have. We have 2,800 requests for advice, and I think it's 400 of those related to gifts. So gift is a high area. The tools, the guidelines we currently have are pretty long and cumbersome. I intend in the coming months to review them carefully to give as clear advice as possible, as concise advice as possible. It has to be based on the Act, obviously, and the code. It has to be accurate, but I'm trying to make them a little bit more user-friendly. And to the extent I can, to give indication in advance of how clearly the office will interpret a situation, such as the one you've raised.
Right.
So it would be useful if we, in fact, could have if members or the committee would like to draw a list of the most common occurrences where it would be important for MPs to get clear direction, what is in and what is out under the code. Because when we talk about MPs, we talk about the code. The Act is not applicable to MPs. Members of the government, of course, parliamentary secretaries and ministers are governed by both the code and the Act. But as far as MPs are concerned, if I only knew, precisely, I would have a better sense of what are the most common arising situations where it's not clear to MPs.
To that end, I mean, on the issue of fundraising, and we've talked about this with your predecessor, someone who may, like my political position on, say, telecoms, might buy a ticket to my fundraiser. I didn't sell them the ticket, but they buy a ticket to the fundraiser. That's a, open event. They can do that. There's a difference when someone who's trying to lobby for a license hosts a fundraiser for you. To me, that would be fairly clear. But we had issues where the lobbying commissioner felt there was a very clear breach, but the ethics commissioner felt it was not quite as clear. So when you talk about an MOU with the lobbying commissioner, are we going to try and move towards a common understanding of apparent conflicts and direct conflicts so that that the lobbying commissioner is not going after the lobbyists while the conflict of interest commissioner is saying, well, I don't know, it's a gray area?
To the extent possible, we're both independent, of course. We have started to talk. We've had several meetings already. I'm in charge of interpreting the code. She's in charge of interpreting the Lobbying Act. Yeah. But nothing in the Act prohibits us from talking. And if we can agree on a set of common, if you wish, rulings, then I think it would be in the best interest of everyone if we could do that, and we'll work on that.
I noticed in one of the...
We may have some disagreements as well.
Well, that's perfectly fair. I think parliamentarians just want, a general set of rules because we all want to play on a fair playing field. Yep. In the previous parliament, the ethics commissioner was bound, and still is, I believe, to suspend investigations if the RCMP opts to investigate. Very rarely,
or any police force, for that matter.
Or any police force, but very rarely do the RCMP or police actually follow through. So investigations are suspended. In the case of Nigel Wright, it went on and on and on, and then.
In fact, it's still suspended.
It's still suspended.
In fact, it's been reactivated recently with the Supreme Court of Canada decision, and we have so informed Mr. Carson.
Okay, well, so I guess my concern is, would you feel it better if you still had the ability to continue an investigation so that you could report to Parliament, or do we have to define terms on when, if a police investigation doesn't follow through, should we be able to have within a timely manner so that it matters to parliamentarians to get a report?
I think I may be wrong, Mr. Angus, but Mr. Chair as well, based on what I've read in the past, because I always paid interest to this area of practice, even though I was not in charge of it. It it's a rare situation where you have it's very important.
Yeah.
But if you look at all the situations, it's a small minority
Very
of cases.
small.
And I think it's prudent. In most subject areas, that's the practice. It's to stop everything if the police gets engaged into something until such time as the police has disposed of the matter. I think it's prudent to do that. But there could be more direction in the act or the code as to when do you resume, how quickly do you resume afterwards. That would be fine with me because there's currently no such provision.
Thank you, Mr. Angus.
Thank you.
Next up, Monsieur Picard. 7 minutes.
Bienvenue encore, Monsieur Dion. Madame Tremblay, bonjour.
Thank you, Mr. Dion, Ms. Tremblay. I'd like to begin by saying that your work serves not only to maintain the institution's integrity and that of its members, but also to allow all Canadians to have more confidence and less cynicism regarding the importance of this institution. Ethics is going to be an increasing part of what the public looks at in order to assess the caliber of its representatives. A question. The notion of sanctions. Do the sanctions and penalties you apply, are they essentially fines, financial fines? Yes, they are always fines. There's, in fact, not much latitude there. All we can do is sanction failure to report within required periods. But even though money is what makes ethics violations for the most part, is that enough? Well, we believe it would be a good idea to consider giving the Commissioner authority to recommend other penalties to Parliament when a parliamentarian's involved. And for others, it could be the direct authority to impose a penalty. I think that would give the system some teeth. But it's up to Parliament to decide if it wants to do that. Because we're governed by a code and not by legislation, that's a loss of authority. Well, it's a question of parliamentary privilege. With regard to distributing information on the new instruments, multimedia tools, the issue may be not just providing the tools, it's encouraging participation. In your measures, have you considered ways of tracking participation? Does the fact that someone is unaware of a measure, in fact, excuse him or her from... It's not a defense. No, it isn't. But in cases where there is doubt, misinformation, or lack of knowledge might affect interpretation of these actions. So how do you make sure that people know what's in the Code and the Act? In the Code, distinctions are made on penalties depending on whether somebody did something wittingly or unwittingly. That's not something I've thought about yet. I think it would be difficult to have a system where we could track what members saw what video on what. I don't think we want to become a police state in that way. Perhaps as we review the code, there might be an obligation to look at certain modules, but it should be imposed by your peers, not by us. For those of us who have a LinkedIn account or are on LinkedIn, we are regularly told what institutions have looked at our LinkedIn page, so that can be tracked. The technology is there. Coming back to technology, though, in your statement, you said that your budget hasn't changed in 10 years. It's about $6.9 million. 80% of that budget goes to salaries. So that leaves you a little less than $1.3 million for your ongoing day-to-day operations. Have you, with a view to doing more multimedia, have you assessed the means whereby you could go to multimedia? The videos are expensive. Have you seen whether your remaining 1.3 million will be enough to do the multimedia efforts, will be enough for the multimedia efforts you wish to implement? Well, it's much less expensive than it used to be. When we started making videos, they were very expensive. We're not looking at making professional videos. We're looking at making clear videos with a tripod, a small camera, a decent camera, and a $200 teleprompter. That's where we're going. We're going to put content substance ahead of form. I think that's going to be enough for what we want to do. We've done some experiments in-house. We've made 4 small videos, and they're perfectly viewable. Mr. Speaker, I've left my last 2 minutes for my colleague.
2% increase in the number of questions for advice that you receive from MPs.
Yes.
And
from all people governed by
every...
either the Act or the Code. I don't have the breakdown for MPs, okay. But in our annual report, you'll find out.
Okay, and these 2,800 requests for advice, is that what that is, that 22%?
The increase is, that's right, it includes the increase. So last year there were, in fact, I have the precise numbers, which I'll find. Okay, so here it is. In fact, it's 2,900. It's 2,898. Okay.
So we
provided advice and direction 2,898 times as opposed to 2,381. So it's 22%.
So what I'm interested to know in the limited time is 400 requests were specifically about gifts. Do you think that if there was a less subjective rule around gifts, where it's reasonably intended to influence, where if there was something like a firm dollar amount where it was very clear, would that actually reduce the number of requests so that you could actually focus your efforts on things that might be a little bit more substantive?
I would say yes, Mr. Chair. It's self-evident.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Thank you. And we'll go to Monsieur Gord for 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Dion. What I find most striking in what you've said, you've had the same budget for 10 years.
Les demandes et le travail a dû évoluer.
Oh, yeah. There must have been changes in the work over those 10 years. But with the same amount of money, you've managed to provide the same service. What has contributed to your office's work? What has made it possible for your office to provide the same work with the same amount of money? We aren't necessarily doing more work than we did before, even though we have more money. First of all, Mr. Chairman, we're not talking about me, but my predecessor. Everything we're talking about here today isn't what I've achieved. I've only been here for 4 months. It's my predecessor's work. I think the existence of this office was less well known, so that meant there were just fewer requests for advice. It was far less well known. I've seen changes in how demand has altered over the years. There's a direct link between... I think it's taken time. Ms. Tremblay has been here for a few years, and it took time to fill all positions in the office. There are now 49 authorized positions. I'm sure there weren't 49 5 years ago. So that there has been quite a development. Ms. Dawson is a frugal person, in my opinion, and she didn't hire people unless she knew there would be work for them, and that's how it went. Ms. Tremblay, is there something you'd like to add? Well, in the past years, we had a surplus every year. We didn't use all the funding we had. Last year, as Mr. Dion said, we had a surplus that was just under 2%. So we are now spending pretty much all our money. Now the office has matured and the people in it have matured. People stay in their positions for a long time. They're specialized. They have specialized knowledge and skills. It makes it possible for them to respond more quickly, provide advice more quickly. They need to do less research. So experience in people who are there for a long time, who are dedicated to the office, that makes a real difference. Mr. Dion, you also talked about the client-centered approach, videos to inform people. I think that is certainly to your credit. That's a very good idea. But it is, as you said, it's a voluntary approach. What exactly, how is this approach going to be manifested? Well, we're going to try to make it as interesting as possible. We'll hold meetings with people who have influence on members. I have been in touch with the caucuses. I'd like to make presentations before the caucuses. As you know, it's a close-knit community, members of parliament. And the word will spread, especially when it's free. Thank you. I think it's very important for us to be aware of any changes that take place. We know the foundations, we know the basics, but things change every year. In any case, newcomers to the Hill need to be particularly careful. At the beginning of every new parliament, there are new members, and sometimes in their first year, it's a maelstrom, it's a whirlwind, everything happens at the same time. And you could focus on new members. It is always a high-intensity period for the office when a new parliament comes in, and that's when it's good for us to catch new members before anything. Your colleague a little earlier asked for our Twitter handle. I think Twitter is a cheap and easy way of getting messages across. We're going to be repeating the same things all the time. We're going to be repeating the same advice every 2 weeks, every month. So if somebody follows us on Twitter, they will automatically be educated, if you like. There'll be documents appended when you're at the airport and you're waiting for your flight. It doesn't take long to go to your Twitter account and learn something. Thank you.
5 minutes.
So I appreciate all of the work that you do, but I did want to dive into the numbers a little bit. So can you give the committee an example of the advice and direction that might be given to a member of parliament?
We'll focus on members of parliament. When you first get elected and we get notice of your election, you'll get a letter. I think it's within a number of a few days after each MP, whether elected or re-elected, will get a letter. So that's one example, and we say you have X days to please look at the following form, please review, please get back to us in 60 days, and so on and so forth. So that's the first contact, basically.
You have 2,898 advice directions in the previous year. That would be based on, give us an example of those pieces of advice.
So it's all kinds of things, basically. I do have the data with me, but I don't know it by heart. We have, in fact, a complete report.
I guess the reason I'm asking for an example is because you've got 18, this is as far as I understand it, you've got 18 individuals who provide advice. You've got 2,900 pieces of advice given over the course of the year, which is about 160 pieces of advice per individual, which gives us about 13.5 per month, which, assuming that the piece of advice is relatively straightforward, really doesn't seem like a lot of advice given by each individual over the course of the year. So that's what I'm trying to figure out.
So some of the advice is simple. Some of the advice is very complex. It may take several days, in fact, to develop the advice, including consultations with legal services and the commissioner. And it happens quite frequently that it is not simple. When MPs get in touch with us, it's usually because they're not able to find the answer themselves. So there's a degree of complexity in a good proportion of the requests for advice. We also document everything we tell an MP or a public office holder is fully documented, so that we have not only a chance to consult it in the future when the same MP or public office holder consults us, we have to be consistent. But we also have to be consistent between office holders. So documenting takes time as well.
Do the staff docket their time?
They do, yes.
So you would have
In the system.
an exact sense of how much time they've spent per
Yes.
file?
Yes.
And so what would be the average amount of time spent per piece of advice or direction?
So I have the director of compliance and advice. She's in the room somewhere. What the
That's
average
okay.
time?
So there's no immediate urgency to this. So perhaps you could provide that in writing later on.
Okay, we will.
The 8 communications officials. So again, you note that there's been a 30% increase in the number of media requests, but I mean, over the course of a year, surely one person could field 400 media requests. So what do the 8 people do?
Person who fields, as you put it, media requests. So that's one person.
That makes sense.
Full-time equivalent. The other people assist in preparing for appearances like this.
Okay.
That's one example of what they do. They also we have an intranet site so that we have well-informed employees. They also have the internet page to maintain up to date, as well as the public registry. And they also coordinate the work. There's a Canadian Council of Ethics Commissioners. All provinces and territories have an ethics commissioner. So they coordinate, they serve as the secretariat to what's called CCOIN, this Association of Ethics Commissioner, federal, provincial, and territorial association. So, and they also are the ones who are putting together the strategic plan and the reporting under the strategic plan. In fact, I have a document which I'm considering making public, which contains a number of indicators as to performance, basically, based on the strategic plan. So that's grosso modo what the communications and outreach team is doing.
Thanks very much. With my remaining minute, I'll share it with Ms. Fortier. It's like 20% of my time.
Bon, merci beaucoup.
Thank you. I have a question on assessments, the assessments you make of your investigations and work. What kinds of measures do you take to assess your own progress or the challenges you have with investigations? Well, we are a small organization. I meet the director of investigations and the main lawyer. They're the same person, actually. We meet regularly and we review the 15 cases. This morning there are 15, for example. In 2 weeks there might be 12 or 21. It fluctuates. It depends on what comes in and what goes out. So every day I take part in all interviews when somebody is the subject of a complaint and we decide to investigate. I take part, I'm physically present at all interviews. I add questions to those put by the investigator. So I am in a position to assess all investigations. I'm there with the leader of investigations, and I think that being sitting in at interviews really allows me to see how things are going.
5 minutes, Mr. Kent.
Thank you, Chair, again. Commissioner, in your letter to Chair Zimmer in March, with regards to the MOU to work with the lobbying commissioner, you explained, again, as you explained in testimony to us, that your respective statutes limit the areas of potential integration as they prohibit, you wrote, the sharing of certain types of information. And I'm just wondering if and I know you're working on outreach and education, you're committed to work with the lobbying commissioner in that area, but because many of the investigations in your office have a matching significant interest in the office of the lobbying commissioner, I'm wondering whether there might be a way in future for these two offices, for example, with the investigation of the Prime Minister's trip. Surely the lobbying commissioner has been following with interest, perhaps investigating, we don't know, but it would have been interesting to hear the story not only as the Ethics Commissioner interviewed or spoke to the Prime Minister about the registered lobbying foundation, the Aga Khan's foundation, but it would have been interesting to know the words or the response of both the Aga Khan and his foundation with regards to that investigation. Do you not think that there's some logic behind reciprocal or matching investigations when an investigation finds violation on one hand, should there not be an investigation with, or at least a report by your counterpart in the lobbying commissioner's office?
It would be great, Mr. Chair, if the act was amended to allow the other commissioner and I to exchange information when it's useful. But we are currently completely prohibited from doing so. That's why we cannot do it. So, but it would be very useful. I think they're both positions of officers of Parliament. I think we can have confidence that we would not do this lightly, that we would not make it public, and so on and so forth. And it would be an additional tool to make sure that what we do makes sense to the people who are subjected to the Act and the other Act as well.
Sure. And I think with regards to your earlier remarks regarding unacceptable gifts, it would be interesting to know, again, from the party that offers an unacceptable gift, not only the party who received and returned in one time frame or another, but to that point again, is it not relevant to mention what the unacceptable gift that was offered and returned consisted of?
I've given this some thought. We're also people are, human beings are curious as well. It's always interesting to know something. But in the global scheme of the ethics scheme, if somebody returns a gift very, very shortly after having received it, I'm not sure it serves a great purpose to make it public. I think it's a fact situation. It's as simple. It depends whether you return after getting caught or you return before getting caught. I think it makes a big difference as well.
Sure. Well, again, and you say human nature is inquisitive, but there would be a significant difference between an unacceptable gift that exceeded $200 and one that perhaps exceeded $10,000 or $20,000.
There's also, of course, the value as a relationship with the interest, of course. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kent. Last question goes to Mr. Angus for 3 minutes.
Thank you. This has been a very interesting meeting. I know we'll have many more interesting meetings. I want to just get back to the line of question I was asking before in terms of sort of defining the relationship of appropriate and non-appropriate. With your predecessor, we did spend a lot of time talking about gifts, but we didn't spend a lot of time talking about sponsored travel. Mm-hmm. And sponsored travel is certainly a manner that could very much influence how a member of Parliament approaches an issue, how a member of Parliament votes. Have you looked into whether or not we need clear rules regarding sponsored travel of MPs, either by other countries that are lobbying Canada for foreign policy issues or for foreign or corporations who may have an interest? Have you started to look into that area?
Not really, no. The code, as you know, allows sponsored travel is perfectly okay as long as it's properly declared. And that's the decision that was made several years ago by the applicable House of Commons committee. I think this is a long-standing parliamentary practice. And if it's done in the open, as it is, with our annual report, which we tabled at the end of March, I frankly don't see any reason to change that. But it's a profound issue of parliamentary habits, if you wish, or custom.
I certainly agree. It's just I remember us talking with your predecessor about whether or not a $50 gift should be considered possibly an influence. But if someone flies you around the world, puts you up in the best hotels, and buys you drinks for 2 weeks, that's not an unacceptable gift. So it just seems to me that if they fly me around Ottawa for the weekend and buy me drinks, I could be influenced. But if I'm doing it in another jurisdiction, I'm not. So whether or not we should just clarify the rules.
our system works. Something is unacceptable if the law prohibits it, essentially, and Parliament decides what's acceptable and what's not. And sponsored travel is acceptable.
So you're what you're telling us is you're putting the onus back on our committee to consider this.
I think I'm talking about the other committee on procedures and
Yes. Procedures. Yes, indeed. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Mr. Dion and Ms. Tremblay, for appearing, and appreciate your testimony today. We'll just have a brief break while Mr. Therian takes his seat. Thank you. Thanks again for attending, Mr. Tarian. I think we've seen each other several times over the past year, but welcome back. We'd like to hear your testimony for 10 minutes. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Good morning. I'm very pleased to be with you today to discuss the 2018-19 main estimates. With me today is Danielle Nadeau, on my right, Deputy Commissioner of our Corporate Management Sector, and Barbara Bucknell, our Director of Policy, Research and Parliamentary Affairs. In the time allocated, I will discuss, first of all, recent changes to our organizational structure, adopted with a view to streamlining our work and moving it towards a more proactive and hopefully impactful approach for privacy protection. And secondly, growing resource pressures associated with fulfilling our mandate. As you know, our goal is to ensure that the privacy rights of Canadians are respected. The speed and breadth of technological advances have made achieving this goal increasingly challenging. In the face of those difficulties, this year my office has gone through a streamlining and forward-looking reorganization exercise. It has sought to achieve streamlining by clarifying program functions and reporting relationships. It sought to be forward-looking by shifting the balance of our activities towards greater proactive efforts with the objective of having a broader and positive impact on the privacy rights of a greater number of Canadians, which is not always possible when focusing most of our attention on the investigation of individual complaints. The approach contained in our departmental results framework is explained in detail in our departmental plan tabled in Parliament 2 weeks ago.
Our work will fall into one of two program areas, promotion or compliance. Activities aimed at bringing departments and organizations towards compliance with the law will fall under the promotion program, while those related to addressing existing compliance issues will fall under the compliance program. We know that a successful regulator is not one who uses enforcement as a first or primary strategy to seek compliance. Our first strategy, therefore, under the promotion program, is to inform Canadians of their rights and how to exercise them, and organizations on how to comply with their privacy obligations. Guidelines and information will be issued on most key privacy issues, starting with how to achieve meaningful consent in today's complex digital environment. We also want to work with government and industry proactively in an advisory capacity, to the extent that our limited resources allow, to better understand and mitigate any negative privacy impacts from new technologies. By sharing information and advice during the crucial design stage of new products or services, we believe Canadians will be able to enjoy the benefits of innovation without undue risk to their privacy. Under the compliance program, our strategy is to bring enforcement actions to ensure violations of the law are identified and remedies are recommended. To this end, we will continue to investigate complaints filed by Canadians, but we will also shift towards more proactive enforcement. Where we see chronic or sector-specific privacy issues that aren't being addressed through our complaint system, we will proceed to examine these matters, for instance, through more commissioner-initiated investigations. Vous nous avez précédemment soulevé la question à savoir si...
You previously raised the issue of whether we have sufficient funds. While we have gone to great lengths to find efficiencies and to make optimal use of existing resources of approximately 25 million, the growing significance of the digital revolution means we cannot keep pace. There's also a difficult-to-manage tension between our complaints work and our proactive work. Both are significant components of our mandate, and we cannot effectively do both under current funding levels. You did recognize this in your PIPEDA review report when you recommended that my office have discretion to manage its caseload more effectively. The truth is that despite restructuring, there are insufficient resources, in particular to provide impactful advisory work. This is why I asked the government for a measured increase in permanent funding above what is provided for in the plan. The additional funding is necessary if we are to meet planned results highlighted in the departmental plan.
1. Provide organizations with more policy guidance on emerging issues. 2. Improve education for Canadians so they may take control of their privacy. 3. Shift more towards new proactive strategies. 4. Assist our overwhelmed investigators in more expediently addressing complaints filed by concerned Canadians. And finally, deal with mandatory breach reporting, which comes into force in November of this year, but without any associated funding, and as was the case in other jurisdictions, is expected to significantly increase our workload. In conclusion, in order for privacy protection to be truly effective and more than a pious wish, Canadians, of course, need modern laws, but they also need assistance from a regulator with the authority and the capacity to empower them with useful information, who can guide industry towards compliance with the law, and who can hold industry accountable when it is not compliant. We are doing what we can with the limited tools that we currently possess, but we're falling behind and we need additional resources to provide Canadians with the protection they deserve. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Therrien. And first off, Mr. Saini for 7 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Therrien. Thank you very much for coming with your colleagues. I'm going to start off with a general question first. I mean, as you're aware, we are now investigating the situation around Facebook, and you were here, I believe, 2 weeks ago to provide your commentary. But one of the things that you mentioned is that you are embarking on a joint investigation with British Columbia, your counterparts in British Columbia and the UK, looking into AIQ, Facebook. Now, this is something that happened recently. Obviously, this is going to consume a lot of your resources. Do you have sufficient resources to conduct a thorough investigation, or will you be coming back for additional funding?
When an issue like this arises and we're seized with a complaint, as we are seized with a complaint, obviously we devote the resources that are necessary to tackle that kind of important issue. This complaint raises a number of very important systemic issues which potentially will affect many, many Canadians. And one of my points is I want to give priority to work that affects the greatest number of Canadians, not that I do not want to investigate complaints that are case or individual specific, but if I have a choice to make, I must make the choice of undergoing work which affects most people. So that complaint, we will devote the resources necessary. It may be that there will be a cost to pay elsewhere, but that investigation, we will put the money necessary to investigate it properly.
The second question I have is regarding your departmental results indicators. So I read here that there's a rather significant decrease in the percentage of complainants responded to within service standards compared to the previous year. Could you explain why, and is there any measures being taken to correct that?
So there are two explanations for the two investigative groups. The explanation is a bit different in the two cases. For the public sector investigative group, the Privacy Act investigative group, the increase in the time required to complete an investigation is, I would suggest, oddly enough, good news in that we had a backlog of older cases that we have taken measures to tackle, and we have now completed these investigations, and this has the effect of lengthening the average response time for all of our work. So yes, the average response time under the public sector investigations has increased, but this is because the backlog of files older than 1 year has been reduced by roughly 1/3, by 30 to 33%. On the private sector side, There is also an increase, although the response time is generally a bit shorter than on the public sector side. And that's a function of the number of complaints and the complexity of complaints. The fact that there are more and more technologically complex, that the business models that we're investigating is more and more complex, that takes more time.
So going back, there's something that was mentioned in your 2016-2017 departmental results report. You noted that on the public sector side, the office has noted a significant drop in breaches reported in 2016-2017, 147 breach reports compared to 298 in the previous year, and that your office intends to follow up to determine the reason for this decrease. Do you have anything to share about what you've discovered so far?
We have undertaken a review of this phenomenon that is not quite complete, but is almost at the end of the examination. We have been in touch with a number of departments. We have tried to ascertain the reasons for this phenomenon. The number of breach reports has increased slightly from last year, so it was at a certain point, it decreased drastically in the year you mentioned. It has increased somewhat in the last fiscal year, but our study essentially demonstrates that the number of cases reported is much less than the number of breaches that occur, and that the policy, the Treasury Board policy that is relevant, is not particularly well understood by departments. So we will report on that when we complete our study, and that will be part of our next annual report. But I can say at this point that this is of extreme concern.
More time? 2 minutes? So, okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to leave off with a very general question, because I think this is an important question. Recently with the Facebook issue and with Cambridge Analytica, I think that, you've, in previous testimony, you've said that, outreach, especially educational outreach to Canadians, is extremely important. Looking at the situation that happened and how many Canadians it has affected here domestically, but broader than that, how many people were affected around the world, do you find it important that maybe there should be greater outreach from your office, especially specifically targeting social media platforms?
The short answer is yes. Our main communication tool is our website. We have quite a few people who consult our website when we're working on the practical usefulness of the advice that we give on our website. But an important challenge is to bring more people to that source of information. It used to be a number of years ago that consumer protection officers, for instance, would do ads in the media that would raise the profile of a certain issue. Privacy has a certain profile, I recognize that. But there's an issue in terms of bringing people to the source of information that we have to offer. And I think that's part of the solution.
Thank you, Mr. Sini. Next up for 7 minutes, Mr. Kent.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner. It's always good to see you here in committee. Now, you addressed in your opening remarks the growing importance of the digital revolution. You said means that we cannot keep pace under the current budget of $25 million. With regard specifically to the expected costs of the Facebook, Cambridge Analytica, AIQ investigation, will you find it necessary to contract out investigative services in this area with regards to what has been done and the range of conflicting explanations and untruths that we at this committee are coming across?
Probably not. We will work in concert with our colleagues in British Columbia, the UK, and in other jurisdictions. That's one way in which we divide the work, so that there's a certain distribution of work as between data protection authorities. We have a good, solid number of experts. If there's a cost, as I've said a few minutes ago, it would be in the impact on investigations that may affect fewer people.
Now, in your search for the truth, and again, given a variety of explanations, justifications, and probable mistruths, do you swear all of your witnesses in Canada when you take evidence?
We do not do that as a matter of practice. I don't think we have ever done that in practice, although we have the authority to compel people to testify and to do that under oath. We usually receive cooperation from the organizations that we investigate or the departments that we investigate. It may, but we have these powers, and I would not hesitate to use these powers if I faced a less than cooperative organization.
Now, we've discovered that in the largely borderless digital world, with a variety of jurisdictions and inappropriate, if not criminal activity in different jurisdictions involving associated companies, do you have the authority to find wrongdoing under your current mandate?
No, I do not. I cannot impose an administrative fine, and I do not have any jurisdiction with respect to criminal behavior.
Is your annual report to Parliament due this spring?
It's in September that we usually table.
In September?
When Parliament returns after the summer break.
And will you be adding this year or renewing your request for greater authority, greater ability to apply meaningful penalties?
Yes.
Now, with regards to penalties, and on April 18th, just a couple of weeks ago, the government published in the Canada Gazette the long overdue regulations for mandatory breach reporting and record keeping in Canada. Just recalling for our audience that on June 18th, 2015, the previous Conservative government passed the Digital Privacy Act to amend PIPEDA. Most of that act came into force then, but it's taken 3 years now for the new regulations on mandatory privacy breach notification. We are told that it will only come into effect, although it's been long expected by those who are aware that they will come under the provisions of this reporting. It's only due to come into effect in November. Is that a justifiable delay in your mind?
I think this could have come into force way earlier than in November. So I think it's late in coming. It's of course welcome news, but it's late in coming.
And we're told, I mean, a number of law firms, I'm looking at a document generated by Fasken, but a number of law firms have advised their clients, and I'll quote the Fasken's advice saying, the coming into force of mandatory privacy breach notification reporting and record keeping in PIPEDA represents a sweeping change to the conduct of commercial activities in Canada. The rules will present new costs, risks, and challenges for organizations large and small, including in respect of legal risk management. What's your office doing in terms of advising the provisions of these new regulations to those who will be covered by them?
It's only as of mid-April that we have known the content of the regulations, so it was difficult to give precise advice to organizations on how we would implement them. And we're currently in the process of developing guidance now that we know the text. Now, that being said, before the regulations were published, we were and are still in the world of voluntary breach reporting, and we have contacts, we have conversations with organizations on the information that we think helpful when they report currently voluntarily.
Am I correct in believing that the maximum penalty you have under these regulations is $100,000?
I'll ask my colleague, Madame Bucknell, to speak to this issue, but I think it is not the OPC that has the authority, but the amount seems right.
That's correct. The amount is $100,000, but it is not the OPC that issues the fine. It's a penalty, and we would have to refer it to the Attorney General.
Now, when I expressed the belief that $100,000 was a pretty trivial penalty for a significant breach violation, a member of the government on a television panel that we were participating in said that that $100,000 actually would apply to each of the individual violations, so that if there were 100,000 individuals affected by that breach, it would be multiplied by 100. The possible penalty could be multiplied by $100,000. Is that correct or incorrect?
I've heard that as well. I think we'll have to get back to you with some more specifics on that.
And that would be with regards to your reading of the detail of the regulation?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Kent.
Thank you.
Next up for 7 minutes, Mr. Angus.
Chair. Thank you, Mr. Therrien. We're very pleased to have you. We think we should have a special desk for you here because you're at our committee all the time, and we're using your advice consistently. That's wonderful. I'm concerned about the transformation of the struggle over the privacy file over the last 10 years. Even as we update PIPEDA and that, there's many other elements that this seems to be affecting. And I refer to you to a recent statement by the Bank of Canada that normally doesn't weigh in on these matters. But the Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada, Carolyn Wilkins, said that they're very concerned about the effect on competition in the Canadian economy by the massive control of personal data by a few giant tech firms, most American firms. Quote, access to and control of user data can make some firms virtually unassailable. They can easily drive out competition by combining their scale with innovative use of data to anticipate and meet evolving customer needs at a lower price and sometimes free. Would you consider it necessary that we start to advocate for more powers for your office to start to deal with the more diversified issues that are coming up with the growing data giants, whether it's issues of anti-competition as well as issues of privacy protection?
The short answer is yes, although I don't think it would be appropriate for the Office of the Privacy Commissioner to review all of these issues, but I think I would agree with the Deputy Governor of the bank to start. I think from the privacy perspective, the issue at hand, or one of the main issues at hand here, with the growing centralization of powers in the hands of a few, and the lack of authority or sanctions for actions that violate privacy, is the issue of trust. If the digital economy is to grow, consumers, citizens need to have trust that when they engage in that economy, that their personal information will not be sold or misused, and that there has to be sanctions. Others, such as the Competition Bureau, would certainly have a role to play on the issue of whether monopolies are created. So I think new technologies raise very important concerns that I think have to be addressed through a number of laws and regulators with the capacity to share information and cooperate with one another.
Thank you. To that end, I'm concerned. I've heard from many people about the new agreement that Rogers is putting on its consumers, saying that if you use their services, that you're essentially agreeing to give them access to your personal contacts as terms and conditions of use. In your view, would that be a breach of PIPEDA?
We've been in touch with the company in question, and my understanding is that they have agreed to remove that particular aspect of their privacy policy. We're also investigating other issues with respect to that organization, but on that specific point, my understanding is that they have agreed to withdraw that part.
Well, thank you for that. I guess my concern is that we have Rogers as a Canadian company, a very well protected by Canadian law to maintain their market, and it's a Rogers portal that then goes to a U.S. server. So how do we determine that Canadian law of our information that ends up on an American server like Yahoo, that it still is under the rules and rights of Canadian law?
We were able to convince the sum of companies at stake here to change their practices, even though some of them are American. So I think the law was satisfactory from that perspective in that case.
Well, thank you very much for that. That's good to hear because we've had a lot of concern over it. In 2016, there was a data theft of 57 million users from Uber that was traced back to a Canadian. And Uber did not release that breach. They paid them off, which some U.S. congressman said was reprehensible behavior. I understand you've been looking into this matter. You're formally investigating it now?
Yeah.
It's come up again because of recent testimony of Brittany Kaiser at the UK hearings on Cambridge Analytica, that Cambridge Analytica had met with Facebook, with Uber, which Uber is denying. But there's questions of whether or not that data may have been sold. And this is all speculation, but would you be, just to clarify, would you be raising the issue of Uber and that breach with your UK counterpart when you speak?
We're starting with an investigation of the breach. If that leads us to the issue you're mentioning, we will go there and we will talk to our UK colleagues.
Okay, that's good to know. And again, what I want to know coming out of this is that, these issues that are being raised in the public and at committees in various jurisdictions are being followed up. So I'm very pleased with that. This issue of this hacker in Canada that was paid off, to me that's a very concerning breach of trust by a major corporation, because what we're seeing now, the breaches of 85 million users, 57 million users, these are very, very serious breaches that could have major effect. This person could have sold that money to East European blackmail gangs or to Chinese operatives. How do we establish internationally rules that actually force these companies to play by the law? Because many of them seem to think that laws are somehow quaint and only for domestic companies. They say themselves as international and above domestic law.
So we're investigating some of these issues, including the Uber case, which is all fine and good, and we'll try our best to find the truth and make recommendations. I think part of the solution starts with sanctions. There have to be credible sanctions that give a message to people who would otherwise violate the law that they need to get in line. As to international norms, it's a laudable objective. I would start with having cooperation between DPAs, between data protection authorities of various countries, and try to harmonize laws to the extent possible, which brings me to the issue of adequacy and whether Canada's law should be closer to the GDPR. International norms is laudable.
You would support us adopting GDPR?
As an inspiration. I've made certain recommendations. You have in your PIPEDA review report. We don't have to align exactly to the GDPR, but the GDPR is a good model.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. Next up for 7 minutes, Mr. Erskine-Smith.
Thanks very much. I wanted to first just understand, has Facebook and AIQ and some of the other players that you're investigating in relation to the Cambridge Analytica scandal, have they cooperated so far with your investigation?
We've had a number of meetings or exchange of correspondence with Facebook, so I would say yes. With AIQ, I don't think we've really started. We're trying to define our questions to them. So the question has not arisen as far as we're concerned with respect to AIQ.
When you do have them answer questions, having had them here before us, you may want to administer the oath. When it comes to a company that had 272 Canadians authorize and the sharing of information with an application, and as a result of that authorization actually share the information of their friends in the amount of over 600,000 Canadians. In your view, I mean, I know there's an investigation going on, but I just struggle to see how this is in compliance with the existing law as it is. We can talk about changes to the law to improve it, but I just can't understand, I can't wrap my head around how this could possibly be in compliance with the existing legislation that we've got.
So we're investigating. I think I'll answer by saying, you're saying, doesn't the current law address that problem? The current law talks about consent. It doesn't define consent really. But there is room within the current law to give guidance to organizations on what we expect as a regulator consent to mean. Meaningfulness, information to individuals as to what's at stake, and so on and so forth. So to that extent, yes, the current law gives us quite a bit of latitude in defining our expectations. That being said, I think it would be important for you to understand that we've had communications with organizations on draft guidance on consent following our report last year. And one of the things we're told by some companies is that the OPC has no role to interpret the current law more than or in addition to what the law allows. So in other words, the law is written generally, and some companies are telling us that we have no role in trying to define that more practically for consumers. I find that of concern.
Well, that's of concern, and I mean, given the clear language in the principles related to meaningful consent, there's zero chance that the sharing of such information in the way that was shared is in compliance with our law. When it comes to the investigation, you are undertaking an investigation. We've had witnesses before our committee. Would you, and you don't have to answer now, you can submit names in writing, but it would be of interest to me to have additional names, proposed witnesses, to flesh out our study as we go. If you have suggestions of names that we are not bringing before us, I would appreciate if you would submit names to us. The last question I had, and then I'm going to split time with Ms. Fortier, is in relation to new powers for your office. And we can talk about order-making powers, the ability to define broader audit powers, including the discretion to undertake investigations or not. If you had that basket of powers, would we not be in a much better position to address scandals like we've seen with Facebook and Cambridge Analytica?
Absolutely. We would be in yeah, absolutely.
Thanks very much.
Oh, yeah. Merci. Moi, je vais revenir.
I'll come back to the main estimates. I have a few questions. Earlier, you talked about pressures regarding communications. You need the resources to inform Canadians of new ways of doing things. You are going to use new methods to inform Canadians. What are you planning for next year to increase your presence, your profile among Canadians to help them comply with the legislation? Our planned activities, advisory and educational activities, are already to some extent underway. We are focusing on our website. We take part in a number of workshops, exhibitions, exhibits at conferences, kiosks. The problem is the scope of those activities. The information we provide is accurate, but we have difficulty in reaching most Canadians, to make sure that most Canadians have access to it. So advertising is one way, but I don't have the means to advertise. You don't have the money to advertise. Do you have the staff needed to advertise? We have a communications group that could do some of it, and we could hire people to help with advertising. But it's very expensive. Advertising is very expensive. It is, however, the only thing we would recommend. It's the best way of reaching a lot of Canadians, but it's very expensive. We don't just want to reach consumers. We want to reach companies, organizations. We already provide guidelines, including the one on consent, which is just going to be issued. And these guidelines are to help companies comply with the legislation. As part of our consultations that led to our report last year, we heard that consumers and companies believe that an important role of the commissioners to provide guidance. We have established a list of 30 important topics on which we would like to provide guidelines, guidance, opinions to both consumers and businesses. One significant constraint in the current budget is that our work, our investigating work, will not make it possible for us to provide proper opinions on those 30 topics within the required time. If you look at the list, they're important topics, all of them, and they're topics on which we should be in a position to give advice, and one problem is that we can't. My last point is that above and beyond general guidance, what we'd like to do is provide opinions on more specific issues that can affect Canadians or businesses that are going ahead with business initiatives. There again, we have very little money. We can provide guidance to one or two, but not more.
Next up for 5 minutes, Mr. Gord.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Terrien, more or less on the same topic. When you provide a business with guidance and that company is using personal information, at present, you're called upon when there's an impression that a company, a business, may have gone beyond appropriate bounds, and there's a complaint. Would it be possible for you to, in the future, in cases where there's a company using people's personal information, could that business call upon you to make sure they're acting within the rules? It's a bit like the Wild West at the moment. You try your luck and you sell apps and you profile Canadians depending on the data you can get hold of. Would it be a possibility to encourage companies to call upon you before there's a problem? Could you force them to do that? I may not be able to force them to do that, but that is certainly the direction where we'd like to move. We provide guidance, and we would like to provide guidance to businesses for specific activities. We don't want to become legal services for all of Canada's business world. We certainly don't want to do that. But if we could have the resources to provide guidance to some businesses that have initiatives that touch or affect vast swathes of the Canadian population, that would be very useful. We can do that at this point once or twice a year. We'd like to be able to do it more often in order to prevent privacy problem, not just to take action at the end of the process when there's been breaches, but at the upstream when programs are being designed to make sure that the privacy problems don't happen. We saw the representative of Facebook Canada who was talking about the business model. Advertising is sold to companies or individuals targeted by gender, region, by age, data basically that they collect off the profiles that people put on Facebook themselves. It's becoming like a privacy screen. It's becoming an intervening screen between Canadians and the businesses. They're using that data to reach their target clients and, in fact, saying that they, as a platform, have no responsibility to protect the privacy of Canadians. Is there a way of taking action there? I don't think my role as Privacy Commissioner involves blaming business models as such. I need to operate within the bounds of a democratic country with a free economy. It is, however, my role to ensure that companies, as they apply their business models, do comply with privacy legislation. So if the notion of consent is being poorly or wrongly applied by businesses who are entitled to profit off people's data, my role isn't to question the business model, but to ensure that privacy principles are applied. I would be able to do that more often at the outset of a process if I had more resources. Well, given the size of these companies and the billions changing hands on Facebook, the problems are growing. So 25 million a year doesn't seem like much. Facebook said they added 10,000 employees just to help with compliance. So that's a long way from an extra 50. You must be very restricted. Yes, we are. But if there were genuine penalties, real penalties that could be imposed at the end of a process, and if privacy authorities across the world could pool their resources, we might not reach the size of Facebook, but we could certainly influence their behavior, at least to some extent.
For 5 minutes, Ms. Vanderbilt.
Chair, and thank you very much for being here once again. Earlier you mentioned the new EU rules that are coming into effect, the GDPR, and recommended that perhaps we could look at Canada being more in line with those rules. Now, those are coming into effect later this month. So in the interim, do you see any impact on your work? Obviously, data flows between countries, so if there's data flowing between Canada and Europe, would this actually impact the work that you're doing in terms of Canadian data and privacy?
The real impact of the GDPR, as far as the OPC is concerned, I think will be felt when the European Union makes a decision on adequacy, and that will take a while, according to the information that we have. Now, a number of Canadian companies that collect or use information about EU citizens are subject to the GDPR directly, because the GDPR has that extraterritorial application. But for my office, the impact will be felt mostly after the decision on adequacy.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Which is a few years coming.
Okay, so this wouldn't have an immediate impact
No.
in terms of your resource needs?
No.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. The other thing, earlier today we heard, of course, from the Ethics Commissioner, who suggested that it would be useful if officers of Parliament would be able to exchange information with one another, with, of course, all of the protections in place that it wouldn't be made public. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
You do? Oh, okay, good. And then finally, one of the things you mentioned is that you are looking to do more commissioner-initiated investigations. How would you prioritize? How would you identify where you would do those investigations?
A big factor for me is the number of individuals affected, the number of individuals whose privacy is affected. So I will prioritize an investigation that will have an effect for more people than fewer people. The seriousness of the violation, of course, is an important consideration, as well as the sensitive character of the information at play.
Finally, I was listening to the words that you used in your opening remarks, and you said things like the overwhelmed investigators, the limited tools, and you've indicated a number of areas where you feel that technology is advancing to the point where your resources are not sufficient. What would be the key priority areas that you would see where there's an immediate need for more resources?
I would go back to the need for balance between investigative and proactive work. Both are parts of our mandate. We have a legal obligation to investigate complaints, so we need to do that. But we also have, as part of our statutory obligations, an obligation to educate the public, meaning not only citizens, but also organizations. We need to do both, and that's a big challenge we have. But I think my answer is we need money on both sides to be able to be effective.
What's the current breakdown of your staff in terms of those two, the investigative side and then the education and proactive side?
Roughly the same, a little bit more on the promotion side. Danielle, you had a number a minute ago?
It's about 70 staff on the promotion side and about 65 on the investigative side, and the compliance side.
And you feel the need for more on both of those?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Do I have time left, Mr. Chair? 1 minute?
I'm good.
Okay. I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vanderbilt. Next up for 5 minutes, Mr. Kent.
Thanks again, Chair. Commissioner, it seems that a lot of what we're looking at when we look at Facebook, Cambridge Analytica, AIQ, that there's something along the lines of dealing in stolen property. One company acquires improperly harvested personal data and then markets it or transfers it to other bodies unassociated, and we have a company like AIQ that says, oh, we didn't do anything wrong in harvesting the data, we just developed programs based on data that was given to us by another party. Do you think that it's time for specific legislation in this, again, relatively lawless digital, borderless digital world, where when data is used by a third or fourth or fifth party, there has to be some identification of the origin of that data, where that data comes from?
In theory, we have that already.
How do you determine that?
If consent rules were properly applied and if breach properly sanctioned, that's part of the answer. So there's an issue of a first company acquires information. It needs to do that. There needs to be a link to the services that it offers to the customer. And then consent can be obtained for other purposes. So is that consent properly applied? If not, which happens, there should be a sanction against that company then, which leads to another company that also has an obligation to collect, but only for certain purposes. So if you follow that chain, I think the concepts exist in the law, consent being an important one. What's missing is at least in Canada, are real sanctions for those who violate these laws.
But AIQ says, not explicitly, but in waffling terms, that they have no response. So they were hired to take a bundle of data and then fashion programs to use it to influence a referendum in the United Kingdom, the Brexit referendum, and elections in the United States. They basically indicate they have no interest where it came from. They're basically just dealing with raw data. Do they have an obligation under the law to determine that that's lawfully obtained data?
it gets tricky for me now because we're investigating. I'll stay at the level
well, let's talk in general, sure.
Conceptually, a company acquires information. It has to be to deliver a service to the consumer. That company may contract with another company to deliver certain services. That's fair game. The question is, so what kind of service is offered, and did the consumer consent to that ultimate goal being achieved with their personal information? So ultimately what I'm saying is that I think the concepts are found in the current law. They are at a higher level of generality, so that's a level of concern. But then there are questions that I keep mentioning about the authority of the regulator who can act on behalf of individuals, find out where the problems are, and sanction inappropriate conduct. So at the level of the standards, the rules of the game, I think we have rules of the game in terms of consent and so on that are adequate. It's the apparatus to determine whether compliance occurs and what are the sanctions if a determination is made that there's been inappropriate use. That's where the bigger flaws are.
That time?
10 minutes. 10 seconds.
10 seconds. No.
Yeah.
Thank you,
10
Chair.
minutes would be an awful long time. Next up, Mr. Picard. You're okay? Yeah. Okay. Last question then goes to Mr. Angus for 3 minutes.
Thank you. I want to follow up on two things my colleague Mr. Kent said. One is if you could present our committee with your analysis of whether or not the fines for breaches is per breach or overall maximum. We would need that. Secondly, he spoke about the difficulty we're facing with this culture of lawlessness in terms of some of these third-party operators, but it's exacerbated by the fact that credible corporations who should be following the law seem to have an internal opt-in, opt-out clause for themselves. For example, Facebook. The morning Facebook came here, we found out that they had just shifted 1.5 billion users out of the reach of Facebook Ireland so they could escape the GDPR provisions. These are, we see with Uber paying off a hacker so that they don't have to report it. It becomes very difficult for us to be playing catch up with a company that's that powerful. So I'd ask you, Mr. Therrien, our committee can make recommendations to Parliament. We can issue reports. Can you provide us with, you say you don't have the budget. Well, what kind of budget do we need to be able to start going after and proactively, but also doing public awareness? What tools do you need to be able to ensure that? Have you started a conversation about the larger issues of where your office would fit in with a larger issue of how do we deal with data giants, whether it's anti-competition, whether it's electoral integrity? Those are clearly beyond the confines of your particular office, but your office could provide some guidance on how we need to start addressing taking on data giants so that when Facebook comes to us, we know that the Facebook users of Canada are going to be under the laws of Canada and can't be shifted to another jurisdiction to avoid being accountable.
So I'll undertake to provide that analysis, but I come back at least in general terms to there are a number of areas of the law at stake. We own part of the puzzle. Others, such as the Competition Bureau, own another part. I think cooperation is needed. There's also the need to the fact that I can only intervene on complaints for the most part, and if there is reasonable grounds to believe that a violation has occurred, means that we have some knowledge of corporate practices, but we do not have a very good knowledge of corporate practices. And before you, I would feel comfortable providing an analysis as to what kind of regulation is required. I have some knowledge, but I'm not sure I have all the knowledge I need to make good, solid recommendations to you. So that leads me to perhaps the solution is to start relatively small, ensure that all areas of law are adequately dealt with, including competition, ensure that there's good cooperation between regulatory bodies who will then be able to have a better sense of what's going on, and then proper laws can be adopted.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. And once again, thank you, Mr. Therrien, for appearing once before our committee, and wish you a good day. We're adjourned.